welcome all participants, those that are with us and the ones that they are online. Welcome to another DCN Global major event, an event that it is supported from State Department, from Citizens and Educational Exchange. We really thank for their support. But among all, we would like to thank DCN community, those that they are here with us, but also the ones that they are following us online. For us, it is a major event, an event that shows that we are alive and kicking, an event that shows our determination to continue the wider discussion and also to promote and further what we have started, what we all have started as a vibrant community. Our topic today, and these days actually, it is going to be internet versus democracy. Whether or not it is versus or how this relationship it is being shaped, seen, approached, and also what are the opportunities, what are the threats, what are the limits, and how it will be discussed, is going to be at the center of this today's conference that aims to explore a vital question of our times, a question related to internet as an empowering force, to internet as a force that actually gives space to new voices, but most importantly, how we can address the challenges for our democracy, both positive ones and also negative ones. I would like to thank all of those that worked really hard in order to have this event, our DCN community, DCN volunteers, DCN staff, but above all, the speakers that are with us, both online or offline, and most importantly, the ones that they participate. We are more than happy to announce that we have participants from 76 countries, in total 400 people following us online, and some of them being here with us. I would like to pass the floor now to our first panel, and I would like all of us to give a big cheer to the moderator of Dimitris Dimitriadis and the rest of the speakers. Dimitris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello everyone. Today's panel is Future of the Internet and Public Interest. I'm really honored that I can moderate this panel because I live for this kind of moments as regards internet in the future. And I would like to invite the fellow panelists, Aiden, Rasi, Adria, Constanza, Ami and Alicia will join virtually, and Duce, please. The format will be more discussion than presentations. I will give the tone by reading some things and some thoughts that I had this morning as regards the future of the internet, and then I will pass the floor to each one of you in order to present yourself and say things about your topic, and we can do a discussion. I will do a follow-up question to each one of you, and then we will, according to the flow of the discussion, continue the discussion. Okay, so in order to start and set some things, when we say the word internet out there, the minds of people goes to Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and Google and Twitter, but for me the real internet, few clicks away, is not the big conglomerates, is a wider, more diverse and more generous world, often run by volunteers without clear organization alliance, sometimes small, sometimes in local communities. in order to have free access online. So we live in a world where governments and businesses are doing digital surveillance, and this digital surveillance is almost ubiquitous. So there are various motives as regards monitoring. We know that main one is to track behavior in order to influence behavior, and of course to promote all the regulatory compliance and do things like manipulate purchase and behaviors. So in order for democracy to work, it's important for us people and for us working for the future of internet to assure certain rights and freedoms. So according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we need to have our privacy that must not be compromised, and we need to have the rights of freedom of assembly and association, and of course, expression. So we need to use secure technologies that protect these fundamental rights. So in order to communicate with each other and interact over internet. With this in mind, we need to always think of the future, and of course, in our daily lives, we interweave the real life with the actual digital realm, and we live in some kind of metaverse after the well-known rebranding. The concept of metaverse is being big, but this perpetual online environment is something that is going to come, and we need to understand and we need to set ground rules how democracy will work, and if democracy is the proper constitutional way to work on this kind of situations like decentralized technologies. So we need to have a voting mechanism, we need to give voice to the people and to find ways to maintain all this. We all know that the cost of building a data-driven democracy is high, but we are here to discuss and find new solutions and propose things as regards how this will not be limiting and maintain the gap between poor and rich countries, and to understand that, okay, we have the real economy, but right now the tokenization is coming, and is this thing right? And we can rely on cryptographic protocols, for example, or we just give the keys of our democracy to some strangers, and ways to make it fair, to make it comprehensive for the people as regards our democracy. So we're going to discuss about social media algorithms and is a way to fix them, the government regulations, how public digital literacy will change, if we can find new internet governance structures, and if we need to provide frameworks for all of that. So we can start the discussion. We can start from here. Okay. So.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Aidan Ferdelin. I am a public interest technologist in Berlin, and it is a pleasure to be with you all today. And perhaps before I begin, I'm going to put a question to you in the audience, and perhaps with a show of hands, you can let me know. Have you heard of the term Web3 before? Yes or no? Yes, if you've raised your hand. Okay, and that's interesting. So for those that are not in the room, I would say maybe 10% of the people in the room are familiar with the term Web3. And that's fine. But from the introduction that you just got, we're talking a lot about this term. So maybe I would just define it really quickly so you understand a little bit about what we're talking about. So Web3 is a bit of an umbrella term, and it refers to a group of technologies and applications. Before we start, I might begin by offering some suggestions for what I think we need to think about as we evaluate Web3 technologies, because as we know, the impact of the internet on society has been profound in different contexts. And a lot of the time in what we call Web 2, which is essentially the internet that you probably use today, it's a more centralized internet, has had an impact on society, and often a very negative impact. It's also had a very positive impact, but again, we have to be realistic and pragmatic, and we cannot forget that there have been negative consequences. And so what I think is very exciting about Web3 is it does give us an opportunity to reset and to rebuild the internet and to remake it into something better, something safer. But that will only happen if we're very intentional about doing that. And I also think we have to be very careful about thinking, and I'm guilty of this myself from what I just said, we have to be very careful to remember that disruptions that advanced our society today beyond feudalism, enlightenment, industrialization, political sovereignty, capitalism, democracy, they didn't solve all of the world's problems. And Web3 won't solve all of the world's problems either. Creating a better internet will solve some problems, I think, but not every problem, because ultimately, that's too tall an order to ask. It was only, how do we get human rights? I mean, we got human rights from the aftermath of 2 violent and brutal world wars that forced us to have international cooperation. We can't forget that. And so before we assume that this amazing metaverse is going to bring us to a place where the internet is rights respecting and good for society, you just have to always be very careful that disruptions are not always easy, they're not always solving problems. Web3 often adopts this narrative that it will not only provide us with a new economy, which is so important, but that it will set us on a new course for human freedom. You might hear terms like decentralization, you might hear terms like more resilient infrastructure, and all of this has the potential to be true. Because if Web3 aspires to have any positive impact on society, and it should have that aspiration, it absolutely should, that is certainly what we should be aspiring for, I just hope that we don't forget some of the lessons that we learned in building the internet as we know it today. And so at a minimum, I think we need to adopt a similar approach of international cooperation when building Web3. It is not enough for, and I say this lovingly because I own cryptocurrencies myself and I am a supporter of Web3, but it is not enough for like a few crypto bros to develop Web3 without considering the impact of their technologies on marginalized groups, to not conduct human rights impact assessments. In Web 2, the internet that we use today, a lot of, the technology came first, and then after harms arose, in a rather arbitrary and ad hoc fashion, we then sort of pinned on human rights impact assessments or tried to make some technical changes. I don't think that's good enough. I think we have to learn lessons from the past and be very mindful in building new technologies that we're not causing any negative impacts in the process. I won't be too much longer. Oh, the mic? Sorry. All right, no problem at all. So, it's not realistic, of course, to expect any tech solution to result in zero harm. It's just not feasible, especially when we're deploying technology at scale. But part of being accountable, part of being responsible, is considering the impact of your product on the world that we all share, that we all live in. And so that is my hope for the future. That is certainly my hope that with Web3 we learn lessons from Web 2, we don't repeat the same mistakes. And with that said, I will leave my remarks here because I am sure I could go on and on and on, which would not.
Thank you very much. We will continue the discussion. You can pass the mic. Please use the mic a bit closer because of the mask.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Dueko Zamara. I'm a data protection consultant, and I think I'm going to move the mask a little bit because my glasses are getting foggy. So I work as a data protection consultant, and I'm also a co-founder of an NGO called Politiscope that's based on privacy and digital rights. For start, I wish to address a little bit a problem that we have today regarding data privacy, regarding data protection and privacy in an online world. I think most of you who are here and who watch us online are aware of the problems, but just to give briefly a quick picture what's happening today. We live in the age of the surveillance economy. So all the big tech companies, and not only big tech, but even smaller ones, are competing for our attention and are monitoring and watching every step that we take online, so they can collect as much as possible personal data about us, so they can gain knowledge about our deepest fears, deepest emotions, deepest wishes, and so they can use that knowledge to predict our behavior and to influence our behavior as well. As Carissa Velez put it nicely, privacy is power. So once you have a deep amount of knowledge about someone, you are able to persuade that person, you are able to influence what he or her does. And that's the thing that we have today in our online world. And when we talk about the kinds of personal data that all those companies collect, just to paint a quick picture, because not all people are aware how dark it can get sometimes and what sensitive data those companies can get from us. Some of the examples are, it was discovered that period calendar apps that most of the women that I know are using on their cell phones, most of them share the data of their users with Facebook and other companies. At the same time, it was discovered that Grindr, which is a gay dating application, shares data with Facebook. And so it reveals the most sensitive data about us, and all of that is used to try to influence our behavior in the future. Now, it's one thing when it tries to influence us in everyday life. It's completely another thing when it tries to influence our democracy as well. When we talk about our democracy and the influence of surveillance capitalism on it, I think most of you are aware of Cambridge Analytica case, which is the most famous case that has become famous, that even a nice documentary has been filmed about it on Netflix called The Great Hack. So we have a case like that, or which has seriously impact US elections. We have a case with Brexit as well, where they gain all that deep knowledge about us, and they basically use that knowledge to serve a different ad to everyone that's concerning their deepest fears or wishes. And the problem with the product design of today's social media, with today's platforms, it's that the way the digital advertisement works today is that basically each one of us can have his own advertisement. So each one of us can have his own ad, and neither one of us knows what you saw. So it's completely untransparent, and it's completely unlawful, because all of that data collecting is unlawful. And I mean, when we talk about regulating those things, it's pretty obvious today that companies like that won't and can't regulate themselves, which in the US, that was the first idea. The government wanted to let them regulate themselves. They have said, we will do it by ourselves, we can do it, and we have seen what has happened. So now we are pretty aware that we're the ones that need to do it in terms of real laws, in terms of real legislation. As I'm sure you're well aware, in Europe, in the European Union, not the whole Europe, in the EU, we have the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which is a principle-based and rights-based approach to regulating data protection, to regulating collecting and processing of personal data. So, I mean, you would probably expect it from someone who works in that field and from someone who gets his pay from helping other companies comply with the GDPR, but I honestly do think that GDPR is a really good law. I think it's a great piece of legislation that's really broad, that covers a lot of topics, but I think the main problem with it is that it isn't enforced properly. So the GDPR gives us supervisory bodies in form of data protection authorities in each country that should care and monitor the implementation of the regulation in each country. And currently, they aren't really doing a good job. And there's a pretty good research done by a company named Brave that has discovered that first of all, that they're usually underfunded. So the very small amount of government money is actually put to use by data protection authorities. And the second thing is they usually have a really small amount of technical staff. So a really small amount of people that actually have deep technological knowledge that's necessary to understand how all these platforms and all these algorithms that collect our personal data work. So those are two things, and at the same time, on some places we simply have data protection authorities that aren't independent from the political parties they're in, and that don't really wish to do a good job. Everyone that's in data protection circles has heard of Data Protection Authority in Ireland, which is doing a really awful job, to be honest, because all of the big tech companies' headquarters in EU are based in Ireland, so DPC Ireland is the supervisory body that should govern it. But not only it's not monitoring it, and not only DPC Ireland is not fining those big tech companies that are the largest ones that break the law and that undermine our human rights and democracy, they're actually helping them. There are numerous cases where it was proven that personnel and staff from DPC Ireland was meeting with the staff from Facebook, Google, and other companies to help them not abide the law. So I think it's really important, first of all, to start enforcing the GDPR in the European Union. And I think we can see a positive trend in other countries that are outside the European Union, that they have started implementing similar laws. I think GDPR is a really good role model for data protection legislation. I think more countries should implement similar laws, and I think it should be properly enforced. But other than properly implementing legislation and enforcing it, there's one more thing. I think we should all start raising our awareness of the products we use, of the services we use, and we should actually stop trying to use all those platforms that actually undermine our human rights. And there are many privacy by design services that we have today, and I recommend each one of you to do a little research, and we can even talk about it a bit later, to have some examples to how to use and what services to use that actually care about data protection. So that's it for me from now.
Thank you very much. You refer to products and product design, so I will give the pass to Amy Elliott, which is our virtual panelist, design director at Simply Secure, to speak a bit about UX design and how these products can be better. Amy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
The floor is yours.
Okay. Um, I can share the slides if that's helpful. Let's see.
We can see the slides. Yeah, share the slides.
You you can. Okay.
Yeah, we can see you and also the slides, so you can share the slides.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I am a user experience designer, and I'm here to talk about an example of how UX design can shift power. So user experience design is more than fonts and colors. It's about making things clear and understood. So one example that Simply Secure did, in collaboration with Mozilla, is looking at the YouTube. We know that UX design is really successful in driving profit with surveillance capitalism. And what we're trying to do is design interventions and repurposing these techniques to help people. So, YouTube uh, radicalization is a problem. It's a vector for spreading information. And what we wanted to do is see if YouTube controls and things work as they claim that they do to give people control over the content that they see in their feed. And no, it doesn't. This is one screenshot from a blog post. I'll share the link at the end. And basically what we're seeing here is using the account setting history sends people in a circle with no ability to actually make changes about the content that they see.
Just, just share the slides again. Do you have them shared? Anna, do we see the slides?
I I am in this my call. I'm not sure how to do that. If that's a possibility, do you see the slides?
If it is possible to send it to Anna beforehand, and I will forward it to you also. Yeah.
Okay, they're in. I forwarded it to Mariana and Juliana. Let's see. I can reply to that. See, sorry, it's taking a second. I mean, if you have just a web browser, or we could go.
We will. We can continue without the slides. You can continue, and we will figure out the concept of slides. Okay?
Okay, so the most important, YouTube is claiming that they offer user controls. People curate what in their feed. This is because YouTube works really hard to keep people on the site as long as possible, and that leads to a filter bubble of more and more extreme content because that's how the algorithms work. Their settings aren't working, and just by taking screenshots of the available controls, we can show that. And our work is all for design interventions and using the techniques of UX to push back against big tech and protect. And that's really the point. I can build on kind of the previous talks that the previous speakers that yes, there can be legislation like GDPR. There also be clearer guidance and enforcement at the practitioner level, so that we actually get pixels on screens in ways that make sense. With that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So we can move to our next speaker.
Hi, my name is Adrià. I'm from Barcelona, and I'm a public policy researcher at a private organization called CITL, where we deliver election modernization technologies, and I'm also working at a university doing research on global governance and internet governance. Before I start, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank the organization for the possibility to be here today. It's great to be able to discuss these critical issues with such a group of experts, and the days before, we already have very engaging discussions, so thank you. If I may, I would like to take advantage of this first introduction to discuss about citizen participation in online environments. And I bring good news and bad news as well. So the good news are voting online, deliberating online, it's possible. The technology is there. The organization where I work has spent the last 20 years designing cryptographic protocols, implementing software that enables people to securely vote over the internet from any location, anytime, with the maximum convenience and accessibility. These technologies have actually been taken advantage of. I guess you've heard Estonia offers online voting to all their citizens for the last 16 years or so. There are many other countries that use online voting as well. So for instance, we've worked in Switzerland that introduced internet voting already in 2003, and where the citizens vote up to 4 times a year. So for them, voting online, it's convenient. Also for the administration to organize an election online is much more cost efficient. So the advantages are there. Other countries, such as France, has also used online voting, Canada, certain municipalities in Ontario, and just this week, New South Wales in Australia was also running an election for local government councils using internet voting. But not only governments, other organizations benefit as well of this technology. We have universities using online voting, professional associations, trade unions, NGOs, civil society organizations. So the technology is there, it's secure and can be used, it's convenient, and it's accessible, meaning that visually impaired voters can vote independently, people who live abroad or who are abroad on election day can still cast their vote. So it enfranchises groups that usually are like left aside, fixing some of the limitations of paper-based voting channels. And it has another advantage, and as I was saying, it scales very well. So once an organization, private or public, has an online voting platform, they can use it to ask their members, be it citizens, be it private individuals, how the organization should work. So it's not just about electing people that decide on your behalf. Citizens can vote on any matter. And as I was saying, that's why Switzerland also pioneered the introduction of online voting. In this sense, it was expected that online voting being available, deliberation online would also flourish. And we've also seen now a trend of what we call mini publics or citizen assemblies, where randomly selected groups of individuals discuss certain topics of their choice most of the time, and they have discussed issues of internet governance. In the context of the pandemic, for example, they could continue these discussions also online. The bad news are that even the technology is there, technology is just one of the ingredients of the recipe of public participation and citizen participation. So we still miss what is necessary to actually escalate it at the global level. The first thing we need are more clear procedures and way to evaluate these mechanisms. So we have studies about online voting that show that it increases somehow participation, that it engages certain voters. We don't have so much information about the positive impacts of citizen deliberation and participation, and there is still fear that this will be captured by organizations that have the resources, that have the money, that have the time. So we still need to work on that. And the second element that we need is political will. No, obviously we live in a system where democracy is based on representation. So those who represent us or who are supposed to represent us are not always willing, to give us the capacity to decide ourselves. So it's not the uptake of these technologies and these processes is not as high as we would like to, I would like to, for example. A clear example has been during the pandemic. We expected that in the context of a health crisis where we were not supposed to gather together, where we were supposed to stay at home, governments, for example, will be more willing to introduce these forms of remote decision-making, but they haven't. Actually, we have some studies that show that only 5% increase in demand about online voting and e-democracy. And mostly by private organizations, not even governments. Governments have even halted plans that they already had before. So this possibly, we cannot be so optimistic about the future of citizen deliberation. The other thing is that these experiences work better also when there is a clear community. So at the local and regional level works better than at the global level. There was a study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development last year, more or less, where they assessed up to 300 citizen participation initiatives, and 51% were taking place at the local level. At the transnational level, only 3% of them were taking place. So when we need to discuss the future of the internet, obviously it cannot be done at the local level. It has to be done across borders. And therefore, we may have these limitations. I can end here. So.
Thank you very much. We will continue with questions. Before we go, thank you very much for your questions at Slido. We're going to read them in a while. And please keep posting questions in Slido and share everything using our hashtag Internet versus Democracy and DCN Global. So, Costanza, you can.
Is it open now? Yeah.
Yeah. Please keep it close because of the mask, okay?
Hi, I'm Costanza, and I work in Web 3.0 to grow the ecosystem. So building up on what Aiden said before, I'm all in Web 3.0, and well, I believe it is the future of the internet, which is open, transparent, unstoppable, and censorship resistant. But to explain to you why I am, and I think we are so excited about it, I think we can have a step back and look at Web 2.0 and why it is not working. So in Web 2.0, we have most of the content. Some say 80%, some say 90%, some say 70%, whatever. Most of the content that is online goes through the data center of very few companies. That is Google, Amazon Web Services, Azure. And so that means that we have three main problems. First of all, they can unplug you whenever they want. So it is, censorship is actually a really big problem. So, and there are many examples. There is Wikipedia that gets banned in countries very so often. Voting apps that get banned from the Apple Store or Google Store because they just disagree with that. And that is super common. Like even in Italy, a few months ago, Medium got banned because the government didn't like the advertising it was doing. So it happens like literally everywhere. Then the second reason why Web 2.0 is problematic is privacy concerns. Like we said before, all your data is stored in a single place. That means that one entity has control over it. And the ramification of it goes from Cambridge Analytica that we mentioned before to everything that happens online when they're spying on us. They can predict what you're doing and when you're doing it without your consent. And that is very important. And finally, technical failures. We all think that Google or Amazon are too big to fail, but I challenge you to Google right now, Google down, or AWS failures. And it actually happens quite often. Not even like 2 months ago, Tweet got hacked, for example, and all the data went online. So this is Web 2.0. So imagine right now, I give all my data, I give everything to one person. So Dimitris is in charge of everything. Is the single source of truth and the single point of failure. With Web 3.0, instead, we not rely on him only, but each one of us has a node, and each one of us is actually owns part of the internet. So internet is decentralized. And the good thing about that is that we have no way of knowing whether Aidan is storing some data, or Adrian, or any one of us. So in that way, we protect ourselves from controls, and everything is redundant because everything is replicated. So there is not a single point of failure. And so that means that if someone gets corrupted, because that happens, technical failure, human mistake, and malicious attacks, still internet is redundant and is resilient to those type of attacks. And in this way, the good thing is that the control goes back to people. And it is what internet was supposed to be when it was first idealized back in the 80s. And without getting into the deep technological aspects of it, this is possible thanks to the blockchain technology and the smart contracts. And it is exciting because it is being developed as we speak right now. And there are several examples of what's happening outside in the space. And the most important thing right now is that to make it actually happen and to make it just not like an utopistic future is mass adoption and business model on top of it. And this is what we are doing right now. And with that,
Thank you very much. Yes, you can pass the mic to Rasi.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? I just wanted to start and say thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Rashi Saxena. I primarily work in the digital innovation space. I'm a technologist by training. And maybe I'm going to go back. We've heard some great points from all of the panelists. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to go back to a time where I feel that there's a lot of disconnect between the technical standards that we have now as opposed to how we've evolved as a society, where, I mean, you know, we see a lot of bad actors, and I also think that a lot of the aspects of hate speech and misinformation and disinformation is just an amplification of human problems. So, I mean, if you look at how misinformation or disinformation was spread, and I work a lot around, we use innovative technology to prevent mass atrocities across the world. We work in conflict zones. There's a lack of verified information. So, for example, if you look at the example of the Armenian genocide, or you go back to Nazi Germany, you required a lot of institutional infrastructure, financial resources to muster up to be able to perform and coordinate a particular task. But now it's a lot easier, right? You just need to, as Duye said, target a particular audience and a really cheap mobile device to be able to propagate whatever you want to. So I also think that there's a universally lack of definition of all of the online harms that we're talking about. And on top of that, there's also a very blurred line between what we define as hate speech. I come from Global South, so a lot of the government forces or whoever's in power will censor you based on what you don't like. So how do we have a clinical understanding of how the activities in the online world lead to violence or anything that's happening online? Because everyone can talk about metaverse, but at the end of the day, we're human beings with flesh, blood. So yeah, I mean, we really need to understand how it affects us from a standpoint of view. So what we do at the Sentinel Project, I'm looking at how we are building a repository of languages across the world and hate speech lexicons, which are spoken across the world, which are precursors of violence. I mean, we're not saying that all hate speech terms online, and we usually monitor public conversations. So we look at monitoring places like Twitter or Meta, Facebook. Yeah, I'm just confused right now what to say. But yeah, we're looking at how, and we're looking at a monitoring tool. So we're not necessarily giving out advice. Our APIs are open source and transparent. So we also like to advocate hate speech, or rather our platform HateBase as a service. We're really looking at, activists, researchers, organizations, or anyone who wants to use our APIs transparently. So yeah, some of my takeaways, I'm not going to take too much time, is that we all need to stop working in silos. I know that there are a lot of government entities, and there's a lot of mismatch in policies, and people talk about technical standards. We all need to kind of come together and work together, and also see that you really need technical expertise and people like Due who can help make GDPR compliant, because it's at the end of the day a vague piece of document. You don't really, I mean, people would be happy to pay those fines rather than actually being GDPR compliant, I would say. So yeah, we don't have a universal acceptance or universally defined digital rights aspect. So we might need a legal document. We would need a technical standard that would translate that legal document that could be understood by programmers who are the next generation later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the questions from Slido, we can give the opportunity to the audience here to ask a question first. It is your first and last chance if you don't have any questions. I will go to Slido. So can we have a mic there? I can.
Hi. My question would be regarding the Web3, and I'm an adept of it, and I think decentralized is the future. But I'm curious, what do you think and how could we approach, and also governments usually they're afraid because they cannot control it, which is good for us as activists, as kind of good people, even if everything. But I'm curious regarding child pornography, terrorism, illegal activities, like basically each of us will be part of the Web3, so if we cannot know what will happen, child pornography will happen in all of our computers, illegal things will happen. So what do you see there? Thanks.
So Constanza is looking at you. Can you tell us also your name?
Florin Bodiță from Romania, Corruption Kills Association.
Thank you. Constanza.
That is the question. And yeah, truth is, there is no easy answer for that, because yes, what we're building is unstoppable, used for the good as well for the bad. That's true. That is one of the dilemmas that we are facing right now, how to build up a future where censorship resistance is actually a feature and not a bug. To build up on what you said, in 1994, in Rwanda, the radio was used as a propaganda way to perpetuate the genocide. So absolutely, it happens in the past, and it's probably going to happen in the future as well. I'm not denying and being super naive. Thing is that freedom of information and so censorship resistance is very different from spreading violence and hatred. Those are two completely different things, and they don't fall under the same umbrella at all. So, go back to your question, how can we make sure that's not going to happen? We need to build resilient communities where those type of behavior is simply not welcome. So it's more of a community building exercise to make sure that one is actually respecting each other, because this is what it falls upon.
Thank you very much. So,
hopefully I am a bit louder this time. So it's an excellent question, and I think the answer is it will happen. And we have to be honest about that, and maybe we have to question whether we build certain technologies if we know that something will happen. There's a statistic that I found really mind-blowing. Del Harvey, who leads trust and safety at Twitter, said that when they map out all of the risks to their business, the likelihood of someone posting a certain piece of content, given the scale that Twitter operates at, something with a 1 in a million chance of happening happens 50 times a day on Twitter. And so it's just inevitable when you're building technology at scale that bad things will happen. Maybe we need to question the scale that some things can operate at, but also we just need to be very intentional from the moment that we start building products about mapping out what are the harms that could happen, what are some of the ways that we might be able to mitigate these risks, because we can't remove all harms. But I think it's also very important that, as Rashi said, we don't work in silos. We have to consult with other stakeholders. a lot of these challenges really are not new. There have been a lot of dialogues. There are a lot of experts on online child protection, on terrorism, on addressing hate speech. We need to not build tools without consulting first with those stakeholders who have dealt with many of these very difficult challenges in the past. And we need to also consider not just the ways that a technology can be used or misused, but also think about who are the actors involved that are behind infrastructure. I think resilient infrastructure is really important. There are many human rights that are impacted by the internet, and it is not just some of the civil rights that we've already mentioned, though of course they are impacted by the internet. It is also economic rights. It is also political rights, social rights. So we need to really do a very broad sweep and assessment of what are the impacts of our technology on society. So again, things will go wrong. We know that. We just need to be extremely intentional when designing tools that we're considering those impacts, we're mitigating against them, we're consulting, genuinely consulting with stakeholders that do not have a vested financial interest in the development of a product. So working with civil society, working with other private sector actors, working with governments, and being very intentional that to the extent that we can, we are able to reduce the potential misuse of our technologies. And there are some great examples of where this is happening. The Starling Lab is an initiative out of the a joint initiative between Stanford and the Shoya Foundation that is using Filecoin and the decentralized web in order to maintain repositories of records of genocide so that these records are never lost in history. So there are initiatives out there that are trying to use web-free technologies in a way that is ethical and will serve the interests of society as a whole. We just need to make sure that everyone is doing that and we're not allowing anything to fall through the cracks.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the audience here before we go to Slido? Okay. Introduce yourself.
I'm Aisha. I'm an investigative journalist at OCCRP. I just wanted to push you farther on this. I know we had a conversation already, but does a case of decentralized ownership of the web lead to our experience of the web and our experience of these platforms radically changing? By that I mean, it might be that we each own a copy of Web 3.0 on our computer and it's harder for the government of whatever to remove it. But I think that if I go to the web and I want to have an experience of a social platform, or if I want to buy a book or shoes, I'm going to want to do it one place, and that place is going to be the most efficient place. And it's really not very efficient for me to spend my time checking a bunch of places or having a large negotiation with my community on whether I think this picture of a child on the web is pornographic or just an unfortunate shot of someone's grandkid. So moderation done by a single nasty authority is super efficient, and I don't see how you get around that challenge. Can you enlighten me?
I will give you a very quick, futuristic approach on this. Imagine that right now, artificial intelligence is growing very, very fast. So the artificial intelligence, the single point of a decentralized, autonomous authority that can check all of that can be super, super efficient without having the corruption in mind. So I think that we are moving forward, not just the classic concept of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, but having the check and all these filters, what I call a middleware from AI to actual people. And of course, people always going and moving forward to remove friction from everything. But the decentralized web is not just that. It will converge with AI, it will converge with the blockchain and all that new technologies. So
there will be a
right
technological
now,
solution to it, but we can't say what that technological solution is. Who
yes,
designs
because
that?
we imagine that you are in 1991 and someone describes to you that in the next 20 years we will have mobile phones and apps and the app economy will be huge and someone, it will control and change the elections. You will say that he is naive. Right now, Web3 is building, and we are building it, and this is why we are here and discussing about democracy. And the tools and the technology will come, and I think that the solution is from artificial technology creating a middleware that is decentralized. Any other opinions from the other? Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I don't think artificial intelligence is the solution to solve all of our issues. I think we ideally use technology to moderate or to help solve a problem. Like artificial intelligence might be good to gather all of our data and keep it in one place, but I don't think it's a magic wand that's gonna take away all of the information. One of the reasons why we deployed a rudimentary basic sentimental analysis form was because human moderation takes a massive toll on your mental health. I mean, you can imagine human moderation, 12, 13 hours of looking at gruesome content on sexual violence and other heinous crimes across the world. And automation is more accurate, it's cheaper, and we also think that human moderators shouldn't be doing something like this because it's so poorly paid, in the global south. That being said, a lot of people who are in powerful positions, especially governments, don't know what artificial intelligence really is. A lot of artificial intelligence entities, whether it's from the government or private sector, don't really have an idea of how it works. It's very input driven. We do lack a lot of localized data sets for it to be able to really penetrate and adopt globally, as Aisha had mentioned. So yeah, no, I don't think it's a magic solution.
No, I don't refer to artificial intelligence magic. We have an open poll on Slido. The question is, has the internet been a positive force for democracy development worldwide? So please answer. I cannot see, I see that more yeses than no, but I don't see the exact quotes. So we have another question. Can you pass the mic? Introduce yourself and.
Hi, Christopher Guess. I'm the lead technologist at Duke University's Reporters Lab in the School of Public Policy. I want to follow up with Aisha's question, which she touched on a lot of what I wanted to say. But the other question is, when it comes to these decentralization technologies, blockchains and such things, there's already centralization happening within blockchains, right? Like the vast majority of any crypto miners are limited to probably 12, 24 organizations around the world, people that can afford it, people that can afford to build server farms in northern Sweden, right? So that already is becoming centralized. How do you, if you're saying that Web3 is the panacea that will fix everything, if it costs a lot of money, if it's very technologically difficult, if AI is going to be doing it, well, there has to be people to write it. There's only very few people that can do that. How do you prevent this centralization given the technological hurdles?
You go, anyone? I don't want to monopolize the.
How do you prevent decentralization from being centralized? That's a funny question, but the good thing about the Web 3.0 community, the crypto community at the moment, is that it is extremely welcoming and extremely focused to that problem. And also from the way that it's happening. I'll give an example. A few weeks ago, almost a month ago now, the US Constitution, a copy of the US Constitution was being sold as Sotheby's. So in a very decentralized way, a group of crypto enthusiasts, they did a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, and they raised 40 million, give or take. So in which way we can ensure that decentralization doesn't get centralized is through, again, creating and fostering a healthy community. And this is what people are doing right now. And also, this is what is possible thanks to the DAO, thanks to smart contracts and the possibility that everyone has to fundraise money. So, for example, let's say that right now you have a brilliant idea for a Web 3.0 project. The way to go is to create a community. So create a Twitter account, a Discord server. Of course, like write a white paper with some solid technical foundation. And then fundraise. And it's actually way more decentralized than the traditional world, because in the traditional world, the way that everybody fundraises is through venture capitals. And access to venture capital is very difficult for anyone that is not white, man, 30 years old, from the US, possibly from the Silicon Valley, MIT, Harvard, or Stanford. So what's happening right now is that literally everyone can fundraise without having all the knowledge and the contact that those people have. So go ahead.
I just want to push back a little bit. One, didn't that Constitution DAO fail miserably? And then when they tried to issue refunds, it turns out that if you invested about $250, you lost 90% of it just due to gas fees on the Ethernet chain, or not Ethernet, sorry, Ethereum chain.
So yeah, the Constitution DAO failed miserably because traditional finance came in and decided to flip them away for no reason, by the fact that they could do that. And it was very funny, it was very sad. So yeah, they fundraise money that way, and now they're giving back money to people, so now they can get reimbursed. And gas fee is a problem right now. I'm not denying that. It's something that people are talking quite a lot. And it's also a problem that is being addressed. So without getting too much into technical details, because
Yes,
it gets
please.
boresome, Constitution DAO happens on the Ethereum blockchain. The Ethereum blockchain is shifting from one technology to another to make gas fees be significantly lower.
I'm sorry, just one last point and then I'll
Yeah.
hand the mic to
Yeah,
everyone
please.
else. How is this just not an unregulated security if you're basically raising funds? It's essentially it's just like initial coin offerings a couple years ago where you're offering shares that are unregulated by any financial company. How is this not the same? Essentially just an end round around the SEC or various other financial regulators.
I'm not a financial expert.
Me neither. I'm not a financial expert either. So I can't comment on the question of whether it's an unregulated security or not. You can find different opinions out there. I do think that the point that both of you were raising about, is the decentralized web really decentralized, is a really interesting one. And I think if you look at the venture capitalists that are funding the particular applications in the decentralized web that are attracting the most users, of course, they are not decentralized, they are centralized, and they will continue to centralize, and that is dangerous. I think it's inevitable. I think what we are really seeing happen is that we're just changing the major players. So we're getting rid of Meta and Alphabet, and we're replacing them with new actors, with new funders. And we need to be very careful about that. That doesn't, in my view, take away from some of the positives that Web3 can offer. And so there are different initiatives that are not as well funded that are doing a lot of very positive things. I'm thinking about something that Richard Witt, former Google exec, is working on called GliaNet. And what he is trying to do is he is trying to, I guess, what you would call middleware, trying to create that layer between surveillance cameras on the street and you, so that you are able to communicate to those surveillance cameras whether they may track you or not, if they may blur your face or whatever you would like to do. And he's working in conjunction with Consumer Reports and a few other organizations so that you as an individual will be in a position to be able to choose a trusted mediator to work in your own interests to ensure that you have some degree of say in how technology is impacting you. But these are not all the projects in the decentralized web, and I really do think that the trajectory is going to be towards re-centralizing the decentralized web, just like the internet happened. I mean, Web 1.0, if you want to call it that, was pretty decentralized, then we centralized it, and now we're slowly decentralizing it, and I think inevitably, because there are so many financial interests at stake, we will re-centralize it.
Before we go again to the audience, we must read some questions from Slido, because I see that they are very interesting. What do you think will be the next big change that will happen to the internet? This is huge. Anyone? Yeah, you can.
I have a problem with that. We will hashtag decentralize everything. So what will happen, and also to go back to the question of Aisha, is that new business models are going to be built on top of it, because what we're talking about right now is the infrastructure layer. And of course, that leaves so many questions open, but those questions are mostly like business related. So if you build on top of that, then you can create new business models. And so, yeah.
Okay, and I have another one for you. Do you think that increasingly people will be more tempted to sacrifice privacy in order to get more integrated in the metaverse or in the metaverses?
I'll try to remove the glasses this time, not the
no
mask.
problem. Okay.
If I understand you right, you're asking if you think people with time will...
The classic question, privacy over convenience. They say, do you think that increasingly people will be more tempted to sacrifice privacy in order to get more integrated into the metaverse?
That's something Meta as a company would definitely want. But I'm trying to be optimistic from my point of view and from the perspective of what I'm doing professionally. So I certainly hope we will be ready in terms of regulation on time, and we will have a human rights-based approach while developing metaverses. And so hopefully, when that time comes, that we slowly become using a thing called metaverse, users won't have to choose between those two things.
Okay, great. One thing that I want to add as regards metaverse and decentralization and centralization. Hopefully we're not moving to new digital monarchies that a Meta or a whatever company controls all your virtual reality, augmented reality, or whatever other experience you will have. The core sense of blockchain and decentralization is that you own your data and you are a node in a system of validators. As regards, before we discuss about how Bitcoin miners are centralized, it's okay to be centralized because they are just validating nodes and they cannot control or play with the system. But let's move forward to another question from Slido, and we will pass the floor to the audience. Which platform don't violate our privacy?
So that's probably me again, right?
Yeah.
There are numerous platforms that you can use instead of the most popular ones. First ones that come to mind is, for example, Signal as a messaging app. That would be the best app you could use in terms of private messaging and end-to-end encryption. So it's kind of an alternative to WhatsApp, Viber, and things like that. In terms of browsers, I really like what Brave is doing with their work. It's a really good private browser that blocks all the ads, all the trackers, and other stuff that might be following you online. there's also alternatives to search engines, alternatives to Google. DuckDuckGo is the most famous one, but it does have some problems regarding search results. So there are even more better alternatives in terms of search results, which also take care of your privacy, that are designed on privacy by design principles. I also use, for example, for a mail client, this thing with a mask is really killing me. As a mail client, I use Thunderbird from Mozilla, and generally, I like the work Mozilla is doing with their platform and their work in general, what they do. So those are the first ones that come to mind.
Thank you.
Rashid has an idea to add something.
You need to add something in this. Okay.
No, I'd like to add to that. I think there's Proton email, which is also great. I also use a lot of, I also use password managers. So KeePassXC is one of my favorites. I believe there's an app version, but I usually use the web version. I also like a lot of collaborative documents, although they might not be as savvy as a Google document, but there's CryptoPad, there's CryptPad, there's also RiseUpPad. For the ones who like using VPNs, I'm a huge fan. I use TunnelBear and Siphon, which is very easy to understand. Then what is the other thing? Yeah, I also use a lot of storage tools. So I also use mega.nz, which is end-to-end encrypted. I use Calipio Recorder, which is again end-to-end encrypted. And the last one is FileMail. So yeah, some of the good alternatives when it comes to storage and transferring of data.
So Google the names of the alternatives.
Or don't Google it.
Oh, yeah. Or DuckDuckGo the alternatives. We have another question. Is it worth contacting e-elections in the situation of hybrid war in several countries? Yeah, we have very bold questions from the audience and also from Slido.
Well, it's important to highlight first that an election is not just voting. So making sure that the environment is quiet, that candidates can campaign, that it's easy to identify who is eligible to vote, it's even more important than voting itself. So I will not try to use these technologies to fix a context in which a genuine election can take place if people fear to vote, if there is no possibility for campaigning, if the counting can be disrupted. So no, it's not an easy fix.
Okay.
For this context. But then there are other technologies that can also
I have
help.
a follow-up question as regards technologies. Are these voting technologies open source? And the cost is always a deterrent. And again, there are issues that tech divide and keep lingering on tech for all. So a point on the technology.
So there are different open source voting technologies out there. The first one is called Helios. It was developed in the US like in the early 2000s. The thing is that maintaining a voting platform is not easy. So there is a lot of dependencies with other open or not open source libraries that require constant updates. So even if these platforms exist, they are not widely used. The organization for which I work is a for-profit organization. So basically, we have a business model in which we license the use of the platform. Does it mean that it's closed? No. Well, it's open in terms that the platform is audited by third parties, which have no relation to CITL. In some cases, we have just even conducted open code reviews. So for instance, in Switzerland, before a solution was certified, it was open for inspection by anyone. In Australia, it's the same. And sometimes there have been found some issues that had to be fixed. And Switzerland is also an interesting case as well, because what the government wanted to do before using one of these platforms was to allow anyone to actually try to hack it. So they set up a mock election, and anyone who would like to was enabled to actually try to hack the system. And nobody was able to. So this also does give transparency, it also gives trust. So it's a good exercise in this sense.
And I have another follow-up as regards e-voting. So what happens when a part of an e-voting system gets compromised? can be 100% ensure that the rest of the system remains untouched? Really hot question.
But that's a very good question, because usually we speak about security without defining what security is. And one of the advantages of online voting is that it may not be able to prevent any attack, but it's easy to identify where there has been tampering. Whereas other systems that we use instead of online voting, such as vote by mail, don't have any traceability. So again, an election is more than voting, and sometimes it has been the case that something didn't work properly and a court overturned the results. It can happen as well if an issue is identified with online voting. But it happened also, like Austria had to run an election 3 times because they had issues with the glue in the envelopes that they were using for postal voting. At least the advantage of online voting is that if you have to rerun the whole election, it's much cheaper, so to speak. It's more cost efficient. So instead of having to print anew all the ballots, send all the documents, pay the post taxes, then you already have the infrastructure. Possibly you have already a voter identification or authentication system, so it's much easier to scale it.
Super, thank you. Our previous poll is closed, and we have 72 yes and 82 no, so there is a concern of 28% that the internet has not been a positive force for democracy development worldwide. And now we are opening another poll. Are the blockchain and cryptocurrencies going to help more equitable economic development? Okay, so I have another question from YouTube. Let me find the question. Do you think the current cybersecurity techniques frequently presenting and frequent system audit trails are enough from ransomware prevention and leaked data? Anyone? Yes, do you think that the current cybersecurity techniques can prevent ransomware and leak data and okay, yeah.
No.
No. This is the exact answer that I no.
Okay, so let's look at ransomware. What happens is that you get someone that blocks all your data and prevents you from accessing them unless you pay a ransom. That is like normally what a ransomware is. Current systems, I mean, like ransomware are actually on the rise. I was reading a few days ago that like about 60% of companies worldwide have been victim to a ransomware in the past year. The number can be wrong, don't take me for that, but check it. So current systems, no. Like, I mean, it's happening all the time. I don't want to like say the same thing over and over again, but if you get your data in a decentralized way that is redundant and it is immutable, then you're going to be more resilient to ransomware and attacks.
If I may add, not just the technology is not ready, but legislation is not ready either, and our cyber practices could be improved much. Now there are many attempts to regulate ransomware at the international level that seem to point towards punishing those people who pay to a ransom to get access to their data. It's not access, sometimes they even bribe you that they will release compromising data about you. So, and if actually the legal solution goes in that direction, like it's very unrealistic because yes, on paper it sounds great not to give incentives for ransomware, but what if the target of a ransomware attack is a hospital? Like we will prevent a hospital from having their patients' data available in order to continue treatment. Like some basic services will have to, sit to this kind of pressure. So.
And another one, how do we protect Web 3.0 from child porn, illegal activities, terrorists using it, etc.? Yeah. It was the same question. Okay. Do we have any other questions from the audience? I have one back. Yeah, please give the mic to. Please introduce yourself and then the question. We can hear you.
Hello, I'm Ioanna Skiadi. I'm a master student in risk communication. I would like to ask about the cyber terrorism and how the public, if we talk about the government and each one person that uses the internet, can be protected, as we see in the cyberspace extremists to have high and more high power and influence the public. Thank you.
So that's absolutely not an easy question. I guess a lot of governments would love to hear an answer to that. But I guess now the direction is pointing more towards what users do online with their data. So it's just making sure that we don't create windows of opportunity for this kind of attacks, because like we've come to realize that repressing these attacks, like reacting to them, it's difficult because most of the time there are issues with attribution, we don't know where they come from, and restoring as well, sometimes it's very expensive. So it seems that now the investment is on like making sure that how we behave online doesn't make us a target of this kind of attacks. We as individuals or organizations, be it the electric grid, any critical infrastructure. So be more aware of the vulnerabilities, be aware that defensive is always more difficult than offensive in cyberspace, and have backup plans. But now it's a very important issue because now even cybersecurity insurance are no longer offered precisely because of the magnitude of the attacks. So it seems that it all depends on us in the end.
Yes. We have another question. Can you please pass? Here in front. Your name? No? No. No, it's not working. Okay.
Now? Okay.
Now it's working.
Florin Bădiță, Corruption Kills, Romania. So I would kind of continue a little on the question of we have, because we have, we will have the power to the users, and Web 3.0 will also kind of allow, from my point of view, people to also be more invisible, like to be able to be ghost, to be able to ask and to do stuff without telling that they are they. They could be anybody. A bot, it could be a bot, it could be a real human. We will not know. So the question would be like, okay, we have the revenge porn, we have like QAnon, we have Hitler 3.0 in the future, who knows who will that be. You have bullying that is still prevalent and existing, especially in gaming communities and in other parts. Hate speech, mob lynching, and other things like that. You will have probably in the future like live stream killings, like if you will have like now you have kind of the platform that, okay, we love or hate, but at least they are in a way, they will take down, like, I know, hate groups or the things like that. Sometimes they will take it down. And I know, okay, automated filtering, which is good and sometimes acceptable, works acceptable in English, but is failing for all of the other languages. Like if you have it in Romania or especially in other countries where you have different dialects, automatic filtering could work for photos, but for text or other things like that is kind of a hard problem yet. And how would we do that with that? Like, how do we kind of moderate, or should we kind of moderate something like that? And as a thought experiment, let's imagine that we are in 2030 and we have like, instead of Facebook, there will be kind of the biggest social platform will be called Anarchy Book, where everybody is free to do anything. And what's your thoughts on that? Thanks.
Can you hear me?
Copyright that with the Anarchy Book, you never know.
That's actually a very difficult question in terms of moderation with what we do. Firstly, you got a good point in terms of linguistic challenges because what you say perhaps in Romania or English spoken in the UK is very different from English spoken in the US or in Australia. I come from India and we have 20 different dialects in Hindi. So it's a very nuanced concept and it really depends on what conversation is happening between two people. You also need to understand that when you have mass killings or activities like terrorism, it doesn't happen overnight. There is a lot of coordination, there is a lot of, I would say, conversations around it, and it might not happen publicly because we also have a lot of challenges in moderating the different platforms. Twitter is a lot open, so it's a lot easier for us to see publicly available conversations. Facebook is a lot closed. And now you also have tools which are secure and private, which a lot of these forces are actually using it towards their advantage. But what we need to understand when it comes to censorship, which is something that we don't ascribe to, how effective is that? Because essentially you remove content from platforms, but is that really helping us to avoid the situation? You're effectively removing the terminology associated with it, but you're not removing the hatred towards it. And most of the situations that you see, especially with conspiracy groups that you were mentioning about, it sort of has a reinforcing belief rather than it being effective towards us being in a society of civil discourse. So I don't think censorship is the right way. And of course, it depends on different situations where you are. Sometimes you might need it based on high friction environments where there is a lack of reliable information. But yeah, I definitely don't think that censorship is the solution. Also, different platforms have different definitions of hate speech. A lot of definitions of hate speech, as I mentioned earlier, are just to silence voices that are not favorable to a particular party or a particular force. And of course, it's also a lot of partisanship. So that's, I think, one aspect. Whereas with linguistic challenges, what we're trying to do is we're actually trying to get more citizen engagement around it. We're of course a much smaller team, so we're looking at how can we have more citizens across the world actually who can contribute towards our platform in terms that they have heard, not overheard in movies or in pop culture, but actually heard in real life. Providing some citation, providing some more context, providing associated words that are commonly used with this hate speech lexicon across different languages. So we're also very open. We're currently in 98 plus languages. We have around 1,000 terms across the world, but we're also open to different dialects. And a lot of the, I would say, categorization we do is because we also automate it, but we also have a human moderator at the back end who also looks at all of the conversations. We also have an offensiveness rating, so if you don't have a particular term, you can also provide, and of course the social and political situation is changing every 2-3 years. So yeah, I think that's an attempt where we can sort of crowdsource hate speech terms. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yes, of course, and on a futuristic note, as regards linguistics, GPT-3 from OpenAI has 7,500,000 nodes on linguistics and NLP. So we will see very soon the localization coming from the AI. But open it again.
Hello? Yes, great. So along your comment, because at the beginning also you were highlighting the issues related to anonymity online and whether this was the reason why we have this kind of events, I will say that it's very dangerous to move into that area. For instance, in the EU we have GDPR, which is excellent, but it does not apply to criminal investigations. So all the rights that we have in terms of owning our own data don't apply when a police may argue that they're looking for a greater good. And this applies not only to the kinds of rights we have, but the fact that in contrary to GDPR, that is the same because it's a regulation, so states have to apply it as it is. The regulation of use of personal data for criminal matters is a directive, so states can do whatever they want at the end of the day. I will say that the solution passes for more international cooperation. What you have described are crimes, and many of them are typified in international instruments, such as the Budapest Convention, that is now 25 years old. And even if it's an instrument of the Council of Europe, has been ratified and signed by many states all over the world. And basically, what they are forcing themselves to do is to consider certain behaviors, such as intrusion on ICT systems and others, as a crime. Maybe what we could do is first increase the number of felonies that can be considered as such, as a criminal act, rather than trying to moving towards censorship or removing anonymization, and then strengthening international cooperation, of course, because it's true that issues of attribution are challenging, but the advantages that, in my opinion, anonymity brings to cyberspace are far greater, especially for certain human rights defenders who may be listening to us, than actually having full integrity or traceability.
I have the results from the poll. So the question is, are the blockchain and cryptocurrencies going to help more equitable economic development? And we have an astonishing 58 no and 42 yes. So people don't trust blockchain or cryptocurrencies to give, let's say, the start for economic rights. I will read the next question of the poll for Slido. Will the pandemic experience lead post-pandemic to societies where more people will prefer to increasingly live online? So we are going to move to the metaverse or not? Do we have any other questions from the audience? Because I have many that I want to do in front of me. So I will move forward with one of my questions. As regards big tech and Facebook and centralization, we think that government regulation plus some less direct soft pressure by governments will help shape corporation adoption of more ethical behavior. Shall we push in this direction? Any early thoughts? Yeah?
Well, I will say that the current situation with self-regulation has obviously not worked. So codes of conduct developed by private organizations and self-assess have proven actually not to be as successful as we thought. It's not happening only on the internet. We have previous experiences with fair work abroad or environmental practices, so it's exhausted. I will say that more regulations are needed because even the approaches adopted, for instance, by the EU with the Code of Good Practice, where organizations voluntarily adhere and present certain reports, it's not enough. It seems that the Digital Services Act and the Digital Market Act that the European Parliament is now discussing go in that direction, but I see challenges in focusing only on big tech, because at the end there are many practices related to surveillance capitalism and the exploitation of our data that are not necessarily conducted by the GAFAM. And receiving continuous communication, tracking through mobile devices, etc., is not just an issue of big 5 US-based corporations. We need to be more sensitive to the fact that anyone can exploit our data against our consent or even without us knowing. So this regulation should be actually more with a wider approach, in my opinion.
Someone else? Okay.
Thanks. I barely know how where to start with my thoughts on this issue. I think first we probably need to do some kind of analysis of all of the points of leverage that we have to be able to exercise influence over big tech companies and small tech companies, because some of the smaller players are far more problematic than the large ones. I don't want to sound like I'm defending Facebook here, but Facebook does at least have some due diligence. Not enough, but some. And there are plenty of small players who have none whatsoever. I think that there's a lot of smaller actors that we can really be leaning on. I think insurance companies, for instance, don't get enough pressure put on them to consider who they are insuring and who they are providing cover with. I think some of the larger law firms, the Magic Circle law firms, don't have enough pressure put on them to operate and to only represent the interests of ethical companies. That's a really dangerous point, of course, because ultimately everyone should have legal representation. But at the same time, I think there is a line that needs to be found between when it is ethical to represent or to push through a proposal and when it is not ethical. I also think that we need to, I'm not as skeptical as some others are about self-regulatory initiatives. I think that they do have a role to play in shaping the experiences that we have online. I'm skeptical about regulation because it tends to leave civil society out of the conversation. And at least in self-regulatory environments, there is more flexibility to allow other stakeholders into the room to be able to meaningfully influence the agenda. I think that's important. And I think it's important that we consider building new institutions in a self-regulatory framework that are actually delegated responsibility to deeply consider some issues and to have the authority to make binding decisions on how things are carried out. I'm not really thinking of the Facebook Oversight Board here because I don't think it is a good example of a self-regulatory initiative, but it is one example. And I think that if we look at other organizations like ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which is an extremely imperfect institution that has manipulated its participation of stakeholders in so many ways, it is at least better than nothing. And one thing that ICANN has that I think we would very much benefit from outside of the domain name system and in terms of the platforms that we are all using every day is it has an at-large advisory committee composed of regular, ordinary citizens who have no vested financial interest in the domain name system, who are able to, in a meaningful way, feed through input in a bottom-up fashion in order to shape the policies that are governing the domain name system. I think it would be really great to have something like that able to make decisions on our collective behalf, in some way on behalf of the public interest, able to make binding decisions around, around the platforms that we're using every day. So I think we just really need to be considering all of the points of leverage that we have, not necessarily rushing to regulation, because there is good regulation and there is bad regulation, and there are many countries around the world that are looking at regulation, and if we want to continue to have a global interoperable internet, we really don't want these conflicts of law, because that would be very problematic. We don't want to see certain countries cut off from being able to, the citizens of certain countries being cut off from being able to freely communicate on certain platforms, because the burden of complying with that local law is so extreme that no one wants to do business there, and that is certainly a fear that I have. Thanks.
So we need a framework of interoperability between the systems in order for everyone to...
I don't even know if it's a framework, and I don't even know if it's compatibility, but I think it is, the ultimate goal should be to have a free, open, global internet still. And there's many ways to get there, and we really have to explore all of the leverages that we have to be able to influence or to sway tech companies into operating in ways that are operating more so in the public interest rather than purely the economic interest.
I think that we need to incentivize big companies to operate, because we are speaking about business models. So either we will have policies that they will make them do it, or they will need to do it because they will making money because they are businesses.
They are businesses, and maybe they should be social enterprises, and maybe that is part of the conversation as well around...
around the middle where we need this kind of operation.
Yeah, I think that the incentives just are not there and are never going to be there for them to operate in the interests of all of us, though.
No, I agree. I think data extraction is going to remain the same. We don't understand it and hence don't value it. So I always think that that's always going to happen, and big companies always want to scale up. So that's something, unless we can drastically change it or have more awareness and educational initiatives about what's exactly happening and what third-party authentication is, or how our data is really gone. I mean, a lot of us talk about it, and maybe we're in the space, so we're very passionate about it, but a lot of people don't mind giving off their data, as they say. They're okay with it. And I know a lot of people, we've had conversations, civilized conversations, discussions, they're absolutely okay with it because of the freedoms and the enjoyments and some of the aspects that it gets, like, we live in a very connected world. Also, from a technical standpoint of view, we don't have a technical language to define what we want to protect. So we really lack taxonomies. When we talk about freedom and rights, do we have a universally accepted definition that tells us, hey, this is something that's our right and this is our freedom, and how do we protect ourselves from that? So yeah, I'm not sure.
I have a follow-up question from Slido in the same. Can the option of restricting online information sharing, the spread of fake news and false information, considered democratic, or is it deemed a rather autocratic move?
That's really a very difficult question. You want to take that?
Do you want me to repeat the question? Can the option of restricting online information sharing, the spread of fake news and false info, considered democratic, or is it deemed a rather autocratic move? Is okay to cut off fake news and moderate people, or it is in the lines of democracy?
My short answer is yes. It depends on who you're working with and the verified companies that are working on verifying the news. But yeah, no, I don't have anything beyond that.
So I will say that we already have somehow solved this issue of line, and we're trying to reinvent the wheel, but human rights can show us a lot about what can be restricted, because we have a human right enshrined at different levels, at the European Convention on Human Rights, the CCPR, and it's not absolute. So there are restrictions to these rights, and the various conventions on human rights that enshrine them already include these limitations. What makes restriction on the information we share democratic is that it follows certain procedures, so it's not arbitrary. So I will focus more on which information is restricted and how content is moderated. No? So if we think, for instance, on the right to freedom of expression, the convention, I know more about European human rights frameworks, so says that there are certain exceptions where certain information, I mean, the right to freedom of information has limits, but only are legal those restrictions that fit into these categories, and on top of that are proportional and considered necessary for a democratic society. So we also have the right to honor, and obviously if someone tells lies about us, like a media, they can be fined for what they do, and spreading disinformation about health in some cases has been considered also contrary to the certain other principles that are worth protecting. So I will say let's not so focus so much on what it's done, so how it is done, because then it's received if there are democratic guarantees or not. And if I may, because I would like to return to the topic of regulation, you say that self-regulation by Facebook is better, but I'm not sure whether you will agree on Facebook self-regulating how they process personal data. So going back to GDPR, I know GDPR is not perfect. I act as a data protection officer in a company, and it's not the best. But even having the regulation, we realize that certain actors don't comply with it. So how can we expect these actors that are willing to break the law to actually comply with certain principles or standards if they are not going to be fined? So I will say that regulation is necessary, and then we can discuss how this regulation is implemented, because the year before we already said that data protection agencies maybe are not the best supervisory authority, and I agree, and maybe here we can introduce the multi-stakeholder approach or crowdsourcing techniques where people, possibly randomly selected, discuss whether certain practices comply or not with the law. It's like a citizen jury. We have it for several topics, and in the US they use it for electoral affairs and others. So maybe we What we have to revisit is how the enforcement of this regulation is being done, rather than considering that bad regulation is worse than no regulation at all, because in these experiences, and again, environment, labor standards and the international level show us that, I'm sorry, but these companies make money precisely because they are able to breach those standards.
You were talking about multi-stakeholder approaches and citizen participation, right? I also think that a lot of these citizen participation assemblies are also a good example of education. I think it's a good digital literacy exercise because we all talk about technology and how we're going to use blockchain and we're going to move into Web3, but we don't have basic digital literacy, and it's not a one-off training. It requires constant improvement, and I don't know, I've seen a lot of people in India struggle with our COVID vaccination app and a lot of other ways when a lot of teachers were trying to get into education and actually looking at online learning as a viable and stable option. So I still think that we still lack a lot of digital literacy around these issues, and maybe citizen assemblies is a good example of providing and bridging that gap.
There is actual evidence that combining citizen assemblies with decision-making procedures actually helps people understand the position of the other, because an election, a referendum, it's usually adversarial. It's you against me, and who gets more votes wins. Whereas citizen assemblies, what they want is to reach a minimum consensus or approach consensus. So the idea is that people are gather. They don't gather with whom they want to gather, so there is no echo chamber. Usually they are randomly selected using a stratification technique, so they represent everyone. And there they discuss, and everyone is able to share their own experience, which other people will not know, because if you don't live certain situation, you're not familiar with it. So, so this helps understand others, generates legitimacy on the output of referendums, and it also prevents certain populist discourses, because these are quickly disaccredited by the citizen assembly. And there are very good experiences. For instance, in Ireland, which is a very conservative society, there were certain practices that were banned at the level of the constitution, like marriage between people of the same sex and gender, or abortion. So what the government did in order to amend the constitution was to organize a consultation. Should abortion be legal? Should people from the same sex be able to marry? And before the referendum, they organized a citizen assembly. So people were there, they discussed, people from the different opinions were able to call in experts to explain what are the effects on health, what are the effects on society. They could bring people from religious organizations to explain their position. And the studies show that participation increased a lot in those referendums, whereas in other countries participation was very low. And even surveys that were conducted later on showed that people understood what they were voting for and understood the consequences of it. And they did it twice. So in the second occasion, they live streamed the sessions of the citizen assembly, because of course you only get to familiarize with it if you attend to this meeting. So everyone could follow actually these debates, and they saw that many people actually followed that, and the participation in the second time even increased more. So democracy is not just voting or deciding, it's discussing and understanding the stakes of the other, and I think digital technologies in this sense provide the venue for that.
And of course, we spoke a lot about democracies, so I have a next question as regards new internet governance structures. They will appear, they will draw on collaboration among citizens, businesses, governments. I have examples and proof of concepts like Futarhi, like Solid Democracy. In one case, we use economics and tokens and tokenomics to vote as yes, no. On the other, we have assemblies. So do you think that we will have a new Web 3.0 democracy, or we are slowly evolving to just adjust our democracy to the new digital standards? Anyone? Okay.
I would say that it's going to take a while before we see this at the governmental level, because obviously the current system like empowers certain groups, so they don't want to lose their advantage. But we can see it at all in private organizations, civil society organizations, and at the local level, and we're starting to see it. These public-private people partnerships, whereas different kind of organizations, for-profit, non-for-profit, public-private, gather together actually to come up with something. I'm not sure, as I was saying at the beginning, we don't have enough KPIs or metrics to evaluate how good these alternative systems are really democratic, or are they captured by certain groups? Does deliberation makes common understandings flourish, or it generates more polarization? But at least we have test beds, no, as you were mentioning, that may allow us to argue that they are an alternative and possibly better solution.
Before we go to one final note of each, please keep it short. Do we have any other questions from the audience? I know that you are tired, and I will. Okay. Can we have one microphone? Do you? Okay.
Okay. Flavin Bodisa from Corruption Kills in Romania. So, and I was looking, the panel discussion is the future of the internet and public interest. For me, what I find really fascinating about like Web3, because we also talk here a lot about it, and it's kind of the new hype word, this and NFT, for at least this year, is my personal dream for the Web 3.0 and for decentralization would be to use the Web3 as a tool for creating an open database or kind of an open API where government and citizens and NGOs and others could share data, opinions, like voting different things, and to be there to be preserved for future generations. So, because if we look like websites that were created 10 years ago, 90% of them probably they are dead already. And when we see different fundings, we see something that is founded for 2 years, and then after 2 years it will disappear, and then somebody else will recreate the wheel again and again and again, which is the definition of insanity in a way. The idea for me personally is that no company or government or NGO kind of owning the data, and to be more in the public interest, the data to be somewhere publicly available. And why this is important, because we've seen when Trump when Trump was elected, he started deleting information from different websites about climate change, about different things like that. When other dictators they will get elected, they will probably start, they will kind of tweak to their own reality. So this is why, from my point of view, we shouldn't trust, because elections comes and go, and dictators comes and go, and a lot of different things. So because we have like data.gov.ro or data.gov or the initiative where there is, but this is kind of something centralized. So how you would see a more decentralized way, and also how scalable do you see the Web3, so we could kind of host a gigantic database, like petabytes of data that are distributed, and it's really hard for them to kind of disappear from the internet. Thank you.
Yes, of course, you can.
Thank
I see
you.
it very possible, but you can.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Well, one example would be the web archive that is moving its archive over onto Filecoin. And so I think we're seeing that it absolutely is possible. There are networks out there that are able to scale and are able to host data in different locations around the world, keeping different copies, and ensuring the provenance of the data, that it is not manipulated, and if it is manipulated, we can see what has changed. So there are initiatives out there. These are expensive to fund, though. So that is one real barrier. One thing that Filecoin also offers is the ability to be able to credential documents, because there are going to be a lot of historic documents that we do not immediately want to be in the public domain. They could put people at risk, for example, but we want to ensure that they are definitely archived in perpetuity for future use when it is safe to do so. So that technology exists, it's just expensive. And I think the solution there is that we need to be able to empower legitimate, trusted NGOs and other organizations that have existing track records of doing the right thing, serving in the interests of humanity as a whole, as abstract an idea as that sounds, to help them be able to mobilize decentralized web technologies. I said before, and maybe it sounded a bit negative, I think that there's a lot that can go wrong with Web3, a lot that can go wrong with a decentralized web, and I think that it will ultimately be centralized. No, that is just inevitable in my mind. However, these technologies do not necessarily have to be centralized. So if we are able to empower these organizations to be able to use and deploy decentralized technologies, that is really important, and that's where I hope that we are able collectively to step up to help these organizations with long track records come into this space. Thanks.
And every technology advantage from the hardware point of view is moving towards this direction. So we are going to have a final 1 to 2 minutes final note of each one of you. If you have any last questions on Slido, please send them now. We have some very nice comments from YouTube that is very interesting, and internet made us all human beings, one human global mind. I have something to add on that. And it supports democracy for sure. So I will give you 1 to 2 minutes each in order to have a final note, and then
my closing comment would be, if you have strong opinions on this topic or on any topic, communicate it at the national level to your elected representatives. Even if they don't listen, create a political burden for them. Make sure that your objections and comments are documented. That is the only way I think you can really have an impact. Before, I don't believe regulation is a panacea or the solution for every situation. I don't. But I do think regulation is sometimes appropriate in some circumstances. It's one tool in a policymaker's toolkit. But if you believe in democracy, if you have faith, or even if you don't have faith in your elected representatives to represent your interests, make sure they know what you think about this topic. Create that political burden for them. Thanks.
Basically, Aidan has said main thing I wanted to say as well, so great point. Regarding regulation as a topic, I would agree with what Adria earlier has said, that especially when you talk about fundamental human rights, I don't think we can allow companies to self-regulate, and it has been proven too many times that they won't do it properly. So I think regulation really is needed in those cases, but as Aidan has mentioned, not each regulation is a good one. So all the stakeholders that should be included really needs to be included, and it needs to be thought through to make a good regulation. So what we can do there are, I think, three main directions, three main things, actions basically, we can do to try to stop surveillance capitalism from destroying our rights and our democracy. First is raising our awareness, becoming aware of what's actually happening online and educating people around us. Second is the one Aidan mentioned, it's related to regulation. So if you're really into this topic, if you think it's important, try to influence and persuade your policymakers in your countries to actually regulate those human rights that are important to you. And the third is, in regards to data privacy, try to give your trust to those companies that actually respect human rights, which are the ones we have mentioned before. So privacy by design, that follow that principle. Thank you.
Before we go to the next speaker, we have a Slido poll, internet versus democracy or a new form of government. It will go live now as we speak. So
for for my last statement, I would like to shift the focus on what's the future of the internet will look like. I would rather focus on who is building the future internet. And no matter how promising it is, decentralized, privacy preserving, if it's being left in the hands of certain economic operators or certain technocratic organizations, then it's unlikely that it will meet the basic democratic standards. So maybe we should revisit how the future of the internet is being built and try to make it more multi-stakeholder, more participatory approach. So that we will use it and future generations can actually own it as a social reality and not just technology.
Thank you. For my final remarks, we had so many questions about people worried about the dangers of extreme censorship resistance. And so I want to ask a question, and the question is, who controls the controllers? Because most of the time we see extreme violence is actually someone monopolizing access to information and centralizing everything and decided who can say what, and that leads to dangerous propaganda. So yeah, as a final remarks, I want to ask you, who should be in charge? What do you think should be in charge, and why do you think that that person, that entity, that group of persons should have the power and the ability to actually censor people?
Thanks. Firstly, I think one of the first remarks is going to be that please read your privacy policies whenever you consent. I know that some of them are really long, but maybe there are a lot of incredible people who are working in the space to reduce the privacy policy documents. Also, I think we should start using citizens and not users when referring to these topics. And maybe also one of the big pieces missing in our digital life is to ensure that we have the same degree of protections that we enjoy in our in real life interactions. So if we don't bring a commonly accepted language to understand and embrace these issues, we will forever be a part of the problem rather than the solution. I think that is my only takeaway. And always, perhaps, we have to look at adopting a rights by design approach to everything that we do. And for that, we need more credible and extremely talented people. Yeah, that's what
Thank you very much. On this note, I will just add that we now live, okay, we have the poll live, and I will, so 63% says a new form of governance. We are here to discuss what type of this form will be. And of course, internet versus democracy is 30%, okay, is 70-30. So this is very interesting. What I would like to add is that we live right now in an era that is of epistemic change. In the next 10 years, we will see changes that we didn't even imagine before 5 or 10 years, and of course it will be like 20,000 years of evolution. So we need to be prepared, and we need to make new systems. We need to decide on new constitutions as regards how we will govern this new thing, or the metaverse, or why we need all that. We need all that because our human brain is millions of years of evolution inside, and we cannot beat that with technology. So technology is not here to change actual humans. Even with avatars, even with the whole metaverse, people still will go the road of less friction, and they will try to solve their own needs. So we need to make the new internet and the new metaverse more democratic, more participatory, more of what is missing in our real verse and not in the metaverse. With that, I would like to thank you all for participating, thank the people online, sending questions on Slido, thank all of you, and ask Nikos to tell us some words.
Thank you. I would like to thank the panel, the moderator, and everyone that has actually done a great job and actually offered us a great discussion. I would like to thank also the panelists for contributing in a major question that we realized with this actually poll. It constitutes actually a new form of governance. It shows that this type of issues can only be dealt globally, but with people that they understand what it is about, and with people that form a community like the one that Decent Global represents, a community of action, a community that discusses, promotes, and it is open and transparent, a community that endorses democracy. This is how we can correspond to these challenges, both locally and globally. Thank you very much for a very vibrant beginning of this forum. Looking forward to see you and have you together with us. Thank you very much.